but moving now politically, if indeed the Republicans have managed to sort of not only get the capitalist class, or a good deal of the capitalist class, as well as a populist base, what's left for the Democrat? In other words, what kind of capitalists are still faithful to the Democratic Party? And there, I think the one paradigm, one way of looking at it is the opposition, which is often presented as sort of the dividing line in the capitalist class between private equity, such as Schwarzman and Blackstone on the one hand, would be the Republican side, and what would be left for the Democrat would be more the Larry Fink, BlackRock types. Not exactly, not at all, a return to Fordist corporate capitalism, but nonetheless a certain reborn again form of corporate capitalism, the so-called stakeholder of capitalism of Larry Fink. So what is the organic and ideological texture of the capitalist on the Democratic side?
Well, I think where Democrats have ended up positioning themselves is as kind of social neoliberals, or they've kind of situated themselves in the space of social market capitalism. And by that, I mean that as they've given up on any kind of broad social democratic ambition, they've compensated for that by finding this detour via private insurers, mutual funds, and the like, institutional investors and the like, who they incentivize to provide social services at a fee. Okay, so it's a kind of roundabout way of providing social insurance, medical care. It's a roundabout way of financing public services like infrastructure or the renewable energy transition, but you don't do these things directly. You kind of co-opt in these kind of classes of capitalists who will perform that function on your behalf while extracting fees, management fees along the way. And I think you can see that really clearly when you contrast the Clintons' healthcare reform proposal of the early 1990s with the Affordable Care Act that Obama brought in the 2010s. The Clintons wanted to introduce a system of single-payer health insurance, a universal health insurance system. They failed. At the time, the Republican right offered an alternative. It was the idea of the individual mandate or the personal mandate, and that was proposed by Newt Gingrich. And the idea was that instead of providing universal social insurance, you were going to subsidize private insurers to offer advantageous insurance policies to the general public. Okay, so you provide a social service of a kind, it may be inadequate, but at the same time, you are creating this kind of captive market for private insurers. Now, when you fast forward to Obama, he is doing exactly the same thing that Gingrich wanted to do in the early 1990s. There are genuine progressive elements to the Affordable Care Act, the expansion of Medicaid, but its overriding model is that we're going to subsidize, backstop, incentivize private insurers to offer these kind of okay insurance contracts. Okay, it's not at all adequate as a system of health insurance, but it's great for the private insurers. And you've created this social market for them. So I think the term that Daniela Gabor uses, the de-risking state, describes this model of social neoliberalism that I'm talking about. I mean, that story says two things. You know, both parties have taken a big step to the right, because when Obama introduces the Affordable Care Act in 2010, after the financial crisis, the Tea Party crystallizes around this. It's red hot anger, and this is socialism incarnate. And even Gingrich is accusing them of being socialist. This is socialized medicine, and yet he invented the idea of the individual healthcare mandate. So what's happened here is that Republicans have abandoned a kind of semi-privatization model that they kind of invented in the 1990s. And the Democrats end up in a position where that's all they're going to do. They might expend a lot of energy doing that. They might be very inventive doing that. I mean, Biden's triple legislation is essentially that, you know, the creation of social markets for creating infrastructure. You're de-risking. You're not creating the infrastructure through direct public investments. You're not financing transition to the Green New Deal, far from that. Okay, so this is about as ambitious as they become, but this is for the Republicans now who are, you know, kind of rabid far right. This is socialism. So I think when you look at BlackRock, I think it's significant that BlackRock becomes very important to the Democratic Party at around precisely the same time after the global financial crisis. They know they need to do something. They know they need to kind of attend to all these problems, but they're not going to even try the kind of social insurance model, single payer health insurance, what have you, direct public investment model. And so BlackRock becomes very important for them because it acts, or it promises to serve as a kind of preferred partner in this model of social market capitalism. If you think of it, I mean, what is BlackRock? It's not, you have to realize that the way that New Deal securities law divided the world of finance capitalism is that there's private equity and venture capital and hedge funds on the one side, and they're allowed to do, to engage in very high-risk maneuvers. They can take on very high levels of leverage. They're allowed to claim returns as capital gains. And on the other hand, you have the mutual funds. They're not allowed to do any of these things. They can't claim performance fees. They can only claim management fees, which are a set percentage fee on their clients' assets. Okay, so really they make their money from economies of scale. They're skimming off these kind of management fees, but it's a set mostly 2%. And they're not being incentivized to make windfall gains or to take high risks because they're not making their money out of capital gains. Now, if you look at BlackRock, it's a kind of conglomerate of mutual fund families, index fund families, infrastructure funds, which are kind of mutual funds that go straight into their own operated infrastructure, but they're all under the regulatory umbrella of this kind of mutual fund structure. Okay, they do have a small private equity arm, but that's not their main profit-making model. So they're very ideal for the Democrats because, you know, for one, they're already there managing money on behalf of public pension funds and various other kind of employment funds. They already have practice in this kind of work of mass insurance coverage. And they're already there in infrastructure at a certain moment. I forget the year that they branch out into that. But they're obviously, at a certain point, they become so, the osmosis between the Democrats and the BlackRock is so extreme that you see the prime policymakers in the Democratic Party, you know, after when the Democrats are out of office, they just go straight back to BlackRock, people like Brian Deese. And so these people are proposing these policy models to the Democrats, the infrastructure legislation, et cetera, that BlackRock will then be able to contract for and make a lot of money managing these policy agendas for the Democrats. Just before the last election, Larry Fink was talking about introducing a kind of universal 401k, which is a system of, it's a private pension account that exists for a small class of workers, obviously in the United States, but which is not available on a mass scale. And he looked to the model of Australia, where government actually mandated employers to enroll people in these universal 401ks. It's called superannuation here. Now, Larry Fink was very enamored of that model. And if you look at the conversation, there's obviously a kind of dialogue happening between Democratic insiders and BlackRock at the time, because you start to see prominent Democrats saying, we need a universal 401k. Surprise, surprise, exactly the same idea as Larry Fink. And you can see what they're doing. They're saying, look, Australia has this amazing system of private pension coverage. It's not amazing, by the way. It's better than Social Security because it goes through these mutual fund managers. You make a lot of money, so you know you're tapping into market gains, and we can do something that looks like social policy, and yet we're making this enormous detour via these social market providers, and we're going to make it profitable for these mutual funds, not just BlackRock, but whoever, to be providing this social service to our constituencies. So this is really all they're capable of anymore. The terrain has moved very far to the right. The fact that the Republicans attacked that as being the essence of social democracy or socialism is simply a symptom of how far the point of gravity has shifted. You know, we are really living in a landscape where the right dominates policy discourse, and where the Democrats are recycling something that used to look like a pathway to the privatization of Social Security.